Welcome to this Java Break with Basis. Today's topic is writing your web app in the latest BBX. The topics of these various Java breaks are intended to both educate as well as titillate your imagination and get you excited about what you can do with Basis technology. Today we're going to look at a real business case study. We're going to look at the Basis product download page, a page that hopefully many of you use all the time, and one that we've recently rewritten in Buoy. So let's look at the agenda, the Basis download page case study. Let's firstly discuss the challenge. Why did we decide to rewrite the page? After all, much like many of you, we don't fix what is not broken. We'll look at the choices we had to meet that challenge. We'll look at the execution, how we optimized the solution, how we changed it to deliver it on mobile platforms, and how we localized it for the various languages of our target market. We'll touch on some other considerations, some of which we'll cover in future Java breaks, and finally we'll talk about the benefits that the new solution gave us. And then we'll take your questions. So let's first consider the challenge. What was the need that led us to decide to rewrite or to improve the Basis product download page? So the need to overhaul the Basis download page was necessitated by some internal needs as well as mostly customer-facing needs. Our customers told us they wanted a simpler interface. We needed to restructure it. We wanted to reduce the required contact information to the smallest possible subset to fulfill the requirements of our government export compliancy. We wanted to provide language localizations to auto-detect the locale of the user. We've had occasion to patch a release to necessitate a particular requirement of a client that didn't require a complete new release of the product. In order to differentiate between these two releases, the only difference is that there's a different build timestamp. So we needed to display that on the download page and give the choice to our users to download the specific release with or without the patch. We wanted to also dynamically retrieve the available builds from the Amazon storage, the S3 bucket. And of course, we wanted to have the web application be usable on a mobile device. Not necessarily intuitive for a download, but you'll see later that it does have some value. For our case study, it's certainly necessary to show you how you can deploy your web application for the various mobile devices. So let's look at the choices we had. We could have used our previous tools. The code was brittle and was very difficult to maintain. It was a mixture of Perl, HTML, JavaScript, and SQL. And for example, Perl had a long list of external libraries. CGI, the Common Gateway Interface, Database Independence Interface, Email, FTP, SOAP, SSL. We were constructing the SOAP envelope, for example, dynamically. And there were several other external libraries, which made the product really brittle. And it also meant that maintenance was only possible on a fully fledged web server with all the various components installed. And generally that also meant only one developer could work on it at a time. So our other alternative was to use BBX, the language that we both own and distribute, and that is certainly closer to fulfilling our business needs and interacting with our production data. So one language with direct access to our production data, and we're also able to consume web services to meet our export compliancy and our country code validations, just to give you two examples. So this is what the Basis download page looked like before. And in fact, it stretched to 2 pages. So this is the first page, and there was the second page. A whole host of information that wasn't necessarily required, maybe useful to have to the marketing department, but not essential for the compliancy with export laws. So how do we execute on that? Firstly, we consolidated the underlying code to BBJ. Not particularly difficult, took the business logic that was in place in the other languages and rewrote it in BBJ. Then we did a performance test. It was really critical to us that the Buoy application could perform well both in local conditions, US conditions, as well as internationally. We employed CSS to finesse the look and feel, cascading style sheets, and you'll see an example in a little bit how we took advantage of that functionality. So how did we go about testing performance? The key issue on performance is going to be the latency, the distance between your desktop, wherever your browser is located, and the server that's serving up the application and the web pages. So we took an Amazon EC2 instance in Ireland, fired one up there, which is 4,700 miles from Albuquerque, and Albuquerque to Ireland gave us a 245 millisecond latency. Really very good example of what we hoped was the worst case latency that we might experience. By comparison, from our Albuquerque offices to our live server on the US West Coast was only a 45 millisecond latency. So in looking at the application and checking the latency, we obviously know that we have to check 17 form elements, and those round trips are time consuming. And our first pass, the application really didn't come up to snuff in terms of its performance in those high latency circumstances. And we asked the question, rather our development team asked the engineers the question, wouldn't it be nice if the interpreter could get hold of all the information at once, rather than having to continually ask and inquire on each control what its state was or what the contents of that control were. So the first thing we wanted to do was take advantage of form validation. It's a feature that's been available in GUI, in the sysGUI thin client deployment in BBJ for some time. That allows us to lock the screen from user interaction to make sure that no stray events get fired inadvertently, any flickering doesn't happen on the screen. And we can then validate all the fields at once, thereby reducing the user's perception of a delay in the performance of the application. Previously, as I said, this was only available with our sysGUI. Now it's available in BUI. It's a BBJ 12 feature. Next, we wanted to reduce the round trips. BBJ form validation event now carries information on the state and the control of the contents that are being validated. This is a new feature for both the thin client sysGUI and BUI. And similar improvements have been carried out to the BBJ list control, the BBJ lost focus events, and the BBJ edit modify events. So look out for those functions that you can then use to improve your own sysGUI, thin client, or BUI application. As I said earlier, one of the features that we wanted to employ was to utilize a web service, and we utilized that for our export compliancy. We add jars to the class path in the Enterprise Manager, instantiate the web service client, and add the properties in a hash map. That gives us much higher level of readability and easier maintenance rather than the very complex construct of the SOAP message and handwriting code that otherwise could be managed by the consumption of a web service. Things were made a lot easier with validation, with the light windows notification, for example, on the export compliancy, cookie management, the ability to store information previously entered by the user and have it repopulated automatically for him next time he comes up to use the product, including the choice of language, for example. We get to access the basis data files natively. It eliminates the use of third-party libraries, removed the runtime dependencies, improved the compatibility, and sped up the data access. Hyperlink functionality, a common feature that you'd want in a web page, obviously provided by HTML. It's often overlooked that BBJ offers the BBJ HTML view control. And here we can use the control to create a new window, and therefore not force the user to be navigating away from the current window. So as you'll see in a minute, that's the functionality we use to show the license terms. So we can simply set the contents of the control to a simple HTML string with a link to a web page. In this case, the example I've used here is the basis website. And if you give the target parameter of _blank, it opens the link in a new window. So this is what the new basis download web page looks like. Let me hand over to Nick Decker, our engineering supervisor, to give you a demonstration of its new functionality.
To view the new BUI Basis product download page, we'll navigate to the download section of the Basis website. Clicking on the BBJ and Barista link takes us to the new version of the BBJ download page, which was written completely in BUI. The BUI app is loaded into the content area of the Basis website as an iframe, so all of the surrounding areas, like the purple navigation bar, are still maintained by the CMS system. We've used customized CSS for the BUI app to make it integrate visually with the website, maintaining the same color palettes and using similar gradients for the section headers. We start out by selecting a product. BBJ is currently the only option available. And we also select the revision and the build date for our desired download. Note that selecting different revisions loads up the build list with the timestamp for that release, so it's easy to find out what the latest release date is for the product. Selecting a development build loads up the list box with a dynamic file list of BBJ builds that live in the cloud, residing in an Amazon S3 bucket. After selecting the desired package, we move on to the contact information, which has been pre-populated thanks to the Buoy app saving out the information in a browser cookie. The next step in the process is to agree to the download terms. The first is the Basis License Agreement, and clicking on the hyperlink opens up the document for viewing in a new tab, leaving the Buoy application running intact in the first tab. After perusing the agreement, closing the tab brings us back to the Buoy download page. Select the checkboxes agreeing to the Basis terms and the export compliance, and then the Buoy app displays a lightbox style notification to indicate that the request has been registered and the application is checking with US export compliance. Once that's complete, the download commences and continues on in the background. One of the neat new features for the Buoy version of the download page is the language selection box at the top of the page. It's loaded up with 5 different languages, and the text on headers, buttons, static texts, message boxes, etc. in the Buoy app has been localized into each one of those languages via the BB Translator and the BB Translator Editor utilities. Selecting a new language causes the program to translate all of the text, resulting in a fully localized application. Everything but the proper nouns on the form is translated to the new language. The same is true of Spanish, French, and Italian. Submitting the form brings up the notification in the selected language. The language preference is also saved in a cookie, so after a successful download, the next time the page is loaded, it will default to your preferred language. We'll reset our preferred language to English by selecting it from the list and downloading the product once more. The next time we navigate to the page, it displays the form in English for us.
Thanks, Nick. Well, our next step was to make sure that we could cater for its use on a mobile device on a different kind of browser. And here we turn to a web page called detectmobilebrowsers.com, which gave us a whole host of languages which could detect the size and the kind of browser that you're running on and the mobile device that you might be running on. And for our web page written in Drupal, we needed the equivalent PHP code to detect that we're running on a mobile device and then take away the trappings of our previous web page. But let me hand over to Nick to talk more about that.
We've seen what it's like to run the Buoy download page on a desktop browser, but let's take a look at the same page running on an iPad. Mobile devices, like tablets, have limited real estate, so we utilize code from http detectmobilebrowsers.com to determine if the client browser was on a mobile device, and if so, the script will redirect them to the Buoy app page. This means that the surrounding links and navigation menus will disappear, leaving more room for the app itself. After the Buoy app loads, we can make selections to specify which product we wish to download. Notice that the BBJ list buttons that are used to provide the product revisions and builds are rendered using native controls on the iPad. Tapping on the revision list button brings up the iPad's pop-up selection, already loaded with the available revisions. We want to test a recent development build, so we'll select that revision, then determine which build we want from the list of available build timestamps. Next, we'll change our package selection as we want to download everything this time. The contact information section is next, and since I've previously downloaded BBJ on my iPad, the form has all of my information pre-populated based off of a browser cookie. To simulate an error later on in the process, I'm going to delete my email address for now. The next section, Yes, Send Me Periodic Emails, ensures that you receive important notifications about new product releases and their features and functions. It informs you about our valuable Java Break sessions, which are brief web sessions with tips and case studies that can literally save you hours worth of work. And finally, it ensures that you electronically receive the Basis Advantage magazine, packed with information to make you more productive with Basis products and with articles on what other Basis users have done with the products. I will uncheck it here since I've already subscribed, but if my email changes, I want to make sure that I both enter my new address and check the selection box. Before checking the box saying that I agree to the license terms, it's probably a good idea for me to give the document a quick once-over. Clicking on the link causes the iPad to load up the BASIS license agreement stored in Google Docs in another tab in my browser. The top navigation bar lets me move from page to page, and after a cursory read, everything looks good to me. Closing the tab brings me right back to the download page where the Buoy app is patiently waiting for my decision. After checking both checkboxes, I can now proceed with the download. Whoops! How soon we forget. My email address is still blank, so the page pops up a message box to let me know that I've missed a required field. Notice that the email field in the background has turned red to grab my attention. This makes it easy for me to locate the missing field. After dismissing the message box, I then pop up the keyboard and enter my email address. As I'm doing so, the email field's bright red border and background slowly fade away. So now that everything really is complete, I begin my download by tapping on the download button. The Buoy app responds by showing a light window-styled message box to let me know that it's corresponding with the export compliance service and that my download should commence shortly. Now that we've exercised the new Buoy download page on an iPad, I have a pretty good idea of what your next question will be. Why would you download BBJ on your iPad? You can't install it there, can you? Well, no, the iPad doesn't run a Java application like BBJ. But then again, never say never. We just witnessed a BBJ application running on the iPad in a browser. And even though the iPad may not have direct support for Java, jar files, or even Windows executables, you can still download those files onto your mobile device and then open them up with an associated application. In my case, I've got a Dropbox account, so I can download BBJ onto my iPad, open it up with Dropbox, which then guides me through the process of storing it in the cloud. That way I can download BBJ once over my phone or my iPad, and then make it available in the cloud for any machine at any time. This first screenshot shows the download page running on my iPhone. After downloading the executable jar file, the phone asks me what should I do with the file, with the default being to open it up in Dropbox. The Dropbox application launches and then guides me through the process of selecting the target folder for the file. The application proceeds to upload the jar file to the cloud, now making it available for both my work machine, home computer, and any other machine that has cloud access.
The last enhancement to our web page was to accommodate the multilingual users of our download product. So we wanted to localize for 5 languages. We utilize the BB Translator utility, and we check for the locale specified on the URL. So if the URL specifies a locale, that's the one we'll use. It also checks if that's not available, the save locale in the cookie. And then finally, it'll check the locale on the client's machine if there isn't a cookie available. If none of the above is found, it uses the default language. And of course, it's also user selectable from the BBJ list button on the top of the page. We've utilized the new BB Translation Editor utility, which edits resource bundles in GUI or in Buoy to provide the language translation capability. I would parcel that off to those that are familiar with the alternative languages and be able to do that translation. So let me hand over to Nick to show us some examples of that.
Although the new download page was originally written in English, it didn't take much time or effort to expand support for different languages such as German, French, Italian, and Spanish. We started off by ensuring that each control in the resource file to be translated had a unique name, such as contact_last, for the last name field in the contact information section. We wanted this to be a unique name for 2 reasons. First, since it uniquely identifies the control, we can easily retrieve the control from the resource in our program without having to worry about control ID numbers. After all, referring to a control by name is much easier and more intuitive compared to using numbers. Secondly, since translation bundles are set up using key-value pairs, the control name will serve as the translation key, and the values will be the displayed text for the control that is translated into various languages. For the next step, we fired up the new BB Translation Editor utility, which is new for BBJ 12, and created a key for each control based off of its unique name. Filling in the translated values can either be done via quick lookup on Google Translation, or perhaps by a multilingual coworker or friend. If a value is left blank, it will take the default language, which we've configured to be automatically synced with the English values. Now that our resource and translation bundles are in place, the last step is to add some code to the program to localize the application. Because the download page runs in BUI, the locale can be set in one of 4 different ways: from the URL, from a cookie, from the client machine's default locale, or even interactively via the language drop-down list. The code here shows how the program sets the locale, giving the parameter on the URL the highest priority. Because the program needs to translate all of the controls in real time based off of a selection from the language list, we've registered for the BBJ list select event, shown in this code excerpt. The code retrieves the index of the selected language from the selection event itself, bypassing the round-trip communication that would ordinarily need to take place if the program asked the control for the information instead. Once the index is determined, the locale code is retrieved from a hash map, and the current locale member variable is set. To store this locale preference for later, the program next sets the language cookie to the newly chosen locale. Next, it calls the translate control method, passing in the new locale. The translate controls method is where all of the magic happens. It starts off by defining the resource bundle by specifying the translation bundle that we built previously with the BB Translation Editor. After that, it gets all of the translations for the specified locale. Finally, it sets the text for all the labels and controls on the form to the newly translated versions, making use of the getTranslation method and passing in the key, which is also the control name. It does this for all of the controls on the form in a split second, instantly translating the form to any one of the 5 supported languages.
Thanks, Nick. Well, let's sum up the benefits of our process that we've covered. We've chosen a single programming language, so that's one syntax to learn. We have a more robust application, less prone to breakage, fewer moving parts. Very simple to test and debug, so we can test and debug on one's desktop with our built-in Jetty web server. We can then deploy to a cloud install and have multiple developers test and debug. It's very easy to enhance. We can embed production system business logic and directly access production system data from our business basic application. Some other references, there are Java breaks. There are a couple of them that talk about BUI and the mobile frontier. And there's several basis advantage articles. BUI taking flight. That's one that talks about the add-on ERP system in BUI, about adding style to BBX apps with custom CSS, about the user interface and the screen dimensions that you need to be aware of, letting BUI put your app in touch with your users, and then finally, Parlez-vous français, talking about the localization of your application. So in summary today, we've covered the challenge in our test case, what our choices were, how we executed on those choices, and very importantly, how we optimized the application. We looked at a couple of other considerations, and then we spoke about the benefits. But this topic is not fully exhausted. In a future Java break, we'll cover some more information about CSS editors, and there's several in the marketplace that you could utilize and how we utilize those in our application. We'll also talk about how we retrofitted the BUI mortgage app with some of those optimizations that we mentioned that we've added to the language for both SysGUI and for BUI. So let's take your questions.